open for us, that would be great. Thank you, Rachel.
Ko rangi nui I tu ihu nei, ko papu tuanuku tākausa nei. Ārehina mai mātou I roto e korua aroha. Mō ake tonu tihei mauri ora.
Thank you, Rachel. Right, so thank you for joining us once again. This is our second webinar on the Tui decommissioning. With me today, we have Lloyd Williams, who is the project director for the Tui decommissioning project. Lloyd was appointed last October to take over the project from Susanna, which participated in the first webinar that we held. We're looking to finish it at 11:30, and I know Lloyd has a bit to get to, and then we will stop for some Q&A. So I'll just briefly take you through some of the options that we have on the webinar today. We have the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the webinar, you are more than welcome to include any questions that you have for Lloyd as he goes through his presentation in that Q&A section, and Lloyd will be answering them at the end of his presentation today. So with that in mind, I will hand over to Lloyd, who will be able to introduce himself and share his presentation with you today. Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I will just bring up the presentation material. And good. Well, thank you very much, Stephanie, and good morning to everyone. It's great to be here. As Stephanie mentioned, my name is Lloyd Williams. I joined the Tui Project. I joined MBIE in October of last year as the project director. My background was in oil and gas, 37 years with Shell around the world. So I'm very excited to be part of this this project, which is of great importance both to Taranaki and also to New Zealand. They promised it would be interesting, and it hasn't disappointed so far. Last time we hosted you was almost 6 months ago, so it's definitely appropriate and timely to give you an update on what's been happening on Tui. And we've been spending a little time planning, and I'd like to also update the group on our plans for 2021. So many of you familiar with Tui Field Location, 50 kilometres off the west coast of Taranaki, in a block just north of the Maui production area. The field lies in 120 metres of water depth, and that's significant in that it's New Zealand's only full subsea oil development. The majority of the other developments drill their wells and production off fixed platforms. And that fact becomes quite significant when it comes to talking about the decommissioning of the field. And here you see the field layout. The FPSO Umuroa, which is moored in the field. What you don't see here are the 9 giant anchor chains which secure it to the seabed. But the Umuroa is still there and in the process of being decommissioned and removed. Then in the yellow bubbles, you see the extensive amount of subsea equipment we have laid out on the seabed. And from the bottom of the boat, we have these flexible risers going to arches, which are under the ocean, and then deploying out to the various parts of the field. It's actually 3 fields. The Tui, which has 2 wells on it. You see there on your right-hand side. Amakura is a satellite with 1 well on it, and Pateki is another satellite with 2 wells on it. So a lot of equipment laid out on the seafloor. The Tui field is about 2 kilometres from the boat. Pateki is as far as 6 kilometres. So as you can imagine, a lot of equipment there on the seafloor. And then finally in purple, you see the wells. Well, you see the top part of the wells. Underneath those, of course, are the subsurface penetrations. There are 5 producers that you see here, and there are another 3 wells spread around the field that were the original exploratory penetrations. So this is a great overview because it gives an idea of the equipment that we have to actually decommission and remove from the field. The field has finished its commercial life after having produced about 40 million barrels. So it's now timely to safely and with due concern to environment, take it apart and restore the seabed. Here's a timeline of the project. Field was discovered back in 2003. That was Tui. The other 2 satellites were added in 2004. And the whole field came into production in July 2007. That was under the original operator, AWE. And late in December 16, Taranaki, TTL, acquired AWE's interest in the field and also bought out the other shareholders. They produced the field for a number of years and then planned a infill well campaign where they hoped to uncover additional reserves, but unfortunately that campaign was unsuccessful. And it was the lack of success in that campaign that spurred the ultimate liquidation of Taranaki, as they didn't have the cash flow nor liquidity to cover their costs looking forward. This created an issue in that a decommissioned field or a suspended field cannot just be left offshore, and for that reason the Crown assumed the responsibility for the field and ultimately for its decommissioning, and that responsibility was handed to MBIE, for where we sit. The field was shut in for the majority of 2020, and late in 2020, in November, we were very happy to sign a demob contract with BW Offshore, who are the owners of the Umara. We're delighted to have this contract in place because for sure they are the right people to be demobilising that unit, laying the various pieces on the seafloor for later attention, and we look forward to them completing that work, which is going very well. We look forward to them completing that work towards the middle of the year and sailing the boat away. We're active in other work around the field. In December, we managed to complete an ROV survey despite some inclement weather. That's a remote operated vehicle which inspects under the ocean, and we were able to take a good look at all that equipment on the seafloor as well as the wellheads. And the good news is everything was exactly as we expected. There were no red flags raised by that survey, and it gives us a good baseline on which to plan the next stages of the decommissioning. BW got underway in earnest offshore in January, and as I said, we're making good progress on their work scope, and that allows us to turn our attention to the next 2 phases, which is getting rid of that subsea equipment I showed you and those wells. And we've just gone public on the MBIE electronic tender system, GETS, with searching for registrations of interest for those 2 pieces of scope, namely the subsea removal and the plug and abandonment of wells. So it's a great time to talk to the group out there about those plans moving forward, because we are hoping for strong interest in those pieces of work that have been put out to market. And just to summarise those 3 phases of work I alluded to, the demob of the Umuroa, our target there is to finish by May or June. And then the next 2 phases, which will complete the decommissioning, the removal of the subsea and the abandonment of the wells, both of which we target for the following summer, a year away, summer of 21-22. A word on what we've done in terms of staffing up the project team. As I said, I joined in October. There was a small team in place at the time, but in the last 3 months, we've been very successful in onboarding a strong team. Consists of 2 dimensions. In the green, the technical team, which is based in New Plymouth. And in the blue, if you like, the governmental team, which is based in Wellington. We have onboarded the first 4 people on that list in our New Plymouth office, and I can tell you that's an extremely experienced and very strong team with experience ranging from 20 to 40 years in the international oil and gas patch. Technical manager, HSC manager, well engineer and senior contracts engineer, and we're looking to fill that team out in the coming month. So I'm delighted that we've got such a strong team on the ground, and you know, that level of oil and gas knowledge actually sitting inside MBIE. Supplementing that, on the Wellington side, the departmental side, as we call it, are an equally strong team, navigating the project through the corridors of government and ensuring that we move from stage gate to stage gate smoothly. So overall, I'm delighted with the way this is shaping up, and I really feel that we have a great level of expertise in the technical team, and really deep support in Wellington when it comes to issues such as procurement and finance and the other important aspects of the Wellington terrain. Let me turn now to the high-level timeline, and it is very high level. You see here 21 and 22 played out. At the top is the expected timeline for the removal of the Umuroa, which, as I said, we hope to have complete by May or June of this year. And below are all the activities we've been planning, which will take us through to the final decommissioning, the last 2 stages of the decommissioning of the field. Let me just touch upon each of these high-level bars. Stakeholder engagement. Well, this is really one of the starting points of that as we re-engage with the community, with the public, with business, with iwi, and with industry. And we have quite a campaign planned over the coming months now that we understand our plans in greater detail. I will highlight one particular example there of close partnership. Te Kahui o Taranaki have been involved with us over the last months in terms of helping us understand the Te Ara Maori perspective on the project. And as we move forward, the intention is they will allocate a resource to work very closely with our project team. So really looking forward to that, as it's a great example of having close and genuine dialogue with a stakeholder group. It won't be exclusive, and we intend to have good communication, collaboration and dialogue with all the other parties, the other iwi groups in Taranaki, industry, the business, regulators, and indeed the public moving forward. Next two bars are the regulatory work we have to complete in order to pave the way for more offshore activity. We're writing a decommissioning plan, which at a high level will summarise our plans and the options that we have assessed and the risks and how we've covered them. And we're working on that as we speak. And in parallel, we're working on the marine consent, which is a requirement under the regulatory framework for submission to the EPA. And as you can see, we expect that will take, a large part of 2021 consultation, engagement, and hopefully, ultimately the approval of that plan, which will then allow work to commence. In the orange bar, our procurement effort, and we have gone public with our registrations of interest after, and I'll talk in a little more detail in a later slide on the various phases of that procurement plan, which we hope will see us in a position to award contracts in Q3 of this year. And indeed to open up then the option of targeting the next summer window for both the subsea removal and the wells plugging and abandonment. If that doesn't prove feasible, of course, we have the following summer to fall back upon, but this very much remains the project's target. Now, a few words on each of those three pieces of main work. The BW, the Umuroa, we're about 40% through the work scope which BW are conducting offshore there. I must say they're making good progress, but most importantly, they're making safe progress. Offshore work is inherently risky, and a lot of attention has been put into planning the safe execution of the work. And I'm pleased to say that is paying off. To date, we've completed the preparatory work in terms of bringing the FPSO up to spec for its decommissioning work. And we're well advanced on the flushing of those flow lines you saw laid out. There are minute volumes of oil still remaining in those flow lines, and the intention is to flush them fully before laying them down. We then move on with deconnection and laydown of the risers and the umbilicals, disconnecting the boat. And we hope that we will bid the Umuroa farewell in May or June of this year. Of course, there's still challenges ahead of us. We're still in the process of mobilising the heavy construction support vessels and anchor handling tugs which will come primarily from Singapore. And we're very alert to the threat of COVID and putting in place all the necessary plans to try and mitigate that and to make sure this work is completed in the coming 2 to 3 months. And then we're turning our attention to the other two parts of the work to complete the job, the removal of the subsea kit. And if you look at some of the detailed figures there, it looks small on a piece of paper, but when you consider that field has a sort of diameter of about 10 kilometres, you can imagine those flow lines, umbilicals are spread out over a very large area of the sea floor. 14 kilometres of flow line to be recovered and reeled up, coiled tubing, umbilicals, and the various structures that are sitting on the sea floor, manifolds, gravity bases and clump weights, etc., all of which we intend to remove. And if we're successful, we'll leave a clean seafloor there. This does require some very heavy vessels, and you see a picture of a heavy construction support vessel there, characterised by an extremely large crane on the back, dynamically compensated crane. These vessels are not typically available in New Zealand, so part of our procurement is to look for international as well as New Zealand interest in this job, as we believe that's where we'll find the competition. And the final part of the scope will be the plugging and the abandonment of the wells. There are 8 wells, as I mentioned, 3 exploratory and appraisal wells, which are in various states of abandonment, and 5 production wells, which have just been suspended and will require to be abandoned consistent with New Zealand and good international standards of plugging and abandoning wells. At the top there you see the scope of potential vessels that could do this work, ranging from what we call a light well intervention vessel through to the heavy hitter, the semi-sub mobile drilling unit. And part of the reason that we're entering the market to investigate interest is that we expect we'll get advice and proposals from the market on which is the most suitable type of vessel to carry out the work that we've specified, because there are a large range of possible costs and options available in that little diagram that you're looking at. So that's very important to us, that we engage the industry fully, get feedback from them, and adapt our plans accordingly. But overall, the intention is to abandon each of these wells, fully consistent and in accordance with New Zealand and legislation and international standards, which essentially means placing big cement plugs in the bottom of the hole near the reservoir and on the top of the hole, and cutting off the casing and removing the wellheads at 2 to 3 metres below the mudline. So ultimately, once the currents go to work, there should be very little record of the Tui field having existed once all this work is fully complete. So just a word on the procurement process. As I said, we've entered the market. It's a multi-step open process we're forming here. We have gone in via the government electronic tender system, GETS. We've posted registrations of interest for those 2 packages that I mentioned, Subsea and wells. We're hoping for responses, and that's a fully open. Now we have, of course, identified our specifications and requirements, but that registration of interest is open, fully open to the market, to New Zealand tenderers, to international tenderers, and we're looking for responses to that by mid-March. When we have those back, we will obviously assess them and evaluate them and move to a short list of respondents for each of those 2 pieces of scope by late April. And at that point, we will invite the shortlisted respondents to tender in a request for proposal process during the months of May and June. Evaluation and negotiation will follow, and we hope to be in position by the end of August to award both of those packages, with a view to commencing work at the end of 2021 to hit that summer weather window. And my penultimate slide, just an overview of the contract landscape that's out there. At the top, you see the Tui Project team. There was some talk, you would have heard in the presentation 6 months ago, of us hiring an owner's agent to sit between us and the major work packages. That is not our preferred option any longer, and we believe now, having brought the expertise into the Tui team, that we have enough expertise to manage directly the major contractual packages, which are the ones you see laid out here. In the blue are the small contracts which we have so far awarded and are in the process of awarding: the ROV survey, well examination, benthic marine consent. There may be others to follow. In the orange, you see the large contract with BW, who organise and arrange all the subcontracts, and many of those you see laid out below there. One of the reasons for showing this slide is, although the major sort of piece of equipment in the BW contract, the construction support vessel, has to come from outside New Zealand, all the other pieces of work are supported, that you see on this slide, are supported by New Zealand suppliers and business. So there's a significant amount of subcontract work which is falling in the hands of the experience that we have in both in Taranaki and in the rest of New Zealand. We expect that will be replicated in the other two big packages, in the green, the subsea equipment, and in the purple, the well plug and abandonment. And although here again, although the big equipment has to come in from offshore because it's not available in New Zealand, all the support and supply functions you see laid out here will be available for New Zealand business. And as indeed are the major contracts, and we are looking and are hopeful that New Zealand consortia will be able to bid for those packages. So that's an overview of how we see the contractual landscape playing out. And I think that more or less brings to an end my overview presentation. So let me just, one last slide, which you'll receive in the pack. We do regularly post project updates on the Tui website, so we'll send this pack out to each participant so that they can log into this website and get regular updates. And for those of the participants who are looking at responding to the contractual tenders, more information there on GETS, the electronic tender system. So that, I think, rounds out my part of the presentation. So I think it's back to Stephanie here to see whether we've gathered any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lloyd. I think that was a really informative presentation and really helps us understand where you guys are at, where you've got to, and some clear direction forward for the people on the call that would like to, as you said, get involved in some of them GETS tenders that are out there at the moment. I did in the first session send through how you can make sure that you get updates in GETS, and I will do that again after this session. But if you have already registered, you should have seen some of them coming through. And as Lloyd had also identified, going to the NZPAM's website as well is another good way to see the updates that are coming through as far as how you can get involved. So we do have some questions that have come through that I've been able to answer as we have moved through the session, and there's a couple more coming through. Now we will probably, just so we can hopefully get through a couple of these, we might go a little bit over time. So I'll just let you know that this is recorded. So if you do need to leave, the recording will also be sent out to you. Right, so I think, Lloyd, you had also received a question that had come into you prior to the session. So if you would like to share that question with everyone and your following response, thank you.
Very good. And I would like to answer this one because it is a very important question. And the question is, have you already identified preferred suppliers for the two packages? And those two packages were the two that we have in the market right now. The answer is no. We have not identified preferred suppliers. We are genuinely interested in having this this work considered by the market, by both the international and New Zealand market, and we have no preferred suppliers at this point. Nor will previous work on the field, there have been some potential suppliers who've done study work on the field. That has been valuable, but none of that will lead to preferential treatment moving forward. So we're genuinely interested in an open competition for these two packages of work.
Great. Thank you so much for addressing that, Lloyd. I think it's a really important point. We actually have two questions that have come in that I think probably can be answered together. So it's around the fact that there's a lot of products to be removed from the subsea development and the sea floor that potentially have sea life around them at the moment. And the question really is just to elaborate on the decision-making process of removing that equipment, and potentially would the team ever consider asking for consent to leave some of them products on the sea floor?
It's not our current intent. Now, it's always possible we fail to remove a piece of the equipment, but that's not, I don't think that's likely. Most of the equipment can be cleaned up and removed with standard oil field practice. Yeah, the opportunity perhaps of leaving something there and creating a reef, that's certainly a technique that's used in decommissioning projects in other parts of the world. I've seen that used in Malaysia and Indonesia, where there's the reefs do tend to accumulate quickly on old jackets, and also in the North Sea, where they're literally unable to move, or it's not cost effective to remove some of those very heavy structures they have on the seafloor. But in this case, I think the cleanest option for New Zealand is to remove the equipment, and that remains our current plan.
Great. And in so answering that question, I think you have also answered the follow-up question that was around what extent have you liaised with the other countries that have these understanding more in the decommissioning experience. So yeah, just like you said, looking to the North Sea to understand what they've done. So sounds like you've covered sort of them bases, so that's great. Is there any more questions that we have to answer today? I'll just leave it open just for a moment. Right, okay.
There's perhaps a little more, just reading the question on how we've worked, how we've reached out to other countries, Stephanie.
Oh, yes.
The other group we are in close contact with is Australia. They have a significant decommissioning program ahead of them, and there's an FPSO and a subsea development, almost a look-alike of ours, but it's in 500 metres of water, so somewhat more challenging, called the Northern Endeavour. And we're sharing experience with that team, and I think they in many ways are going to follow our lead, and we're ahead of them. But again, just an example that we're in open communication with other projects, trying to ascertain approaches and what constitutes best practice.
Fantastic. No, that's really good. And then a question around the marine assurance, third marine warranty, or third-party verification process. What is the project's intent in regard to this?
Well, there's certain marine warranty verification work which is the responsibility of our contractors, BW for example, keeping the vessel in class, etc. And we would expect the same of the subsea vessels and the drill rigs. So our primary response to that is to ensure that responsibility is covered by the contractors that we employ. We of course will verify that. There is verification work that's required of us from a regulatory point of view, such as an examination of the wellheads that I mentioned, benthic surveys, and we do that individually and submit those reports to the appropriate regulators, regulatory authorities at the, as required. So a bit of a two-pronged approach there, but for the majority of the marine warranty and class type work for vessels and rigs, that we push to the responsibility of our contractors.
Great. I'll just see if there's any more questions. Maybe a couple coming in.
I do see one on skills there, Stephanie, I could answer.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, well, ironically, in terms of the availability of skills in the Taranaki, New Zealand, with the COVID environment the world faces, we have a huge amount of expertise who's sitting in New Zealand or has returned to New Zealand. And so we've been very lucky in terms of getting very high quality, very experienced staff into our project team, for example. And I think that's a theme that will also flow through the subcontracts and contracts that we seek to place. So ironically, it's a tough time for the world, but ironically that seems to be playing to us in that there's a lot of very experienced New Zealanders that we're finding out there.
Fantastic. So just conscious of time, we might have one last question, and then what we will do is we'll get any remaining questions answered directly by Lloyd and his team afterwards, and we can send them responses after to everyone. So we've got the last question, just understanding the project's constraints by any budget caps, and how is the cost estimation going?
Yeah, well, no project has a blank check. So ultimately there will be a constraint, but right now we're working comfortably in the appropriation that was made public last year by the Cabinet. We are watching carefully how those costs will trend, and we're constantly updating our cost base, but I would say we're probably not in a position to declare any certainty on the final outcome until we go through this tender process. Why? Because that will give us a good indication of what the market is prepared to offer and what the market is prepared to do our work for. So only after that process, I think, would be in a position to really be more definitive on the final outturn costs.
Great, fantastic. So yeah, this is obviously an ongoing thing, and you're keen to continue the ongoing engagement with all the stakeholders, which is really exciting. There's a couple of ways, obviously, you can keep in touch, and as I said, we'll answer the questions that we didn't get to today via email, but there's also the opportunity to either email myself or go to the NZPAM's website and use the Tui decommissioning website there to also send in any questions that you have for the team at any stage during this process. So I'd like to thank again Lloyd for his time today. It's been great to meet you and have everyone meet you virtually today, and we look forward to continuing on the conversation and how people can get involved. So with that in mind, I will hand over to Rachel to close us out with a karakia. Thank you.
Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, ki wātia, ki mama, ki tinako, te tinana, te wairu e te arau takutu. Koe au rā I rongo, whakaria ake ki runga, ki wātia, hai kua wātia, hau pai marare.